Now, January the 1st marked the beginning of an upward review of taxes in Kenya. The coordinator, East African Tax and Governance Network, Leonard Wanyama, said that the country's debt obligations have trapped the economy between a rock and a hard place. The government needs to find money to offset this and has to raise funds through taxation. He went further to say, unfortunately, this will continue to burden the economy and the citizenry while the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic is still present. With minimal take-home and the rising cost of living, Kenyans will have to tighten their belts further in these difficult times. The statement is in response to the Kenyan government demanding more in taxes for 2021 following tax amendments that were signed at the end of 2020 and the expiration of tax relief measures set during the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Effective from the first day of 2021, low salary earners in Kenya would get more deductions. This is because of changes in tax rates that removed lower tax bands, specifically eliminating 15% and 20% rates as the Kenya Revenue Authority seeks to improve revenue from salaries. Kenyans who earn more than 24,000 Kenyan shillings monthly will now pay tax at 25% for the next 8,333 Kenyan shillings, up from 15%. It will be 30% for amounts over 32,333 Kenyan shillings monthly. This is different from the previous tax bands before the pandemic, where individuals paid 15% in income taxes at 16,667 Kenyan shillings above 24,000 Kenyan shillings monthly, and 20% for 16,667 Kenyan shillings above a 40,000 Kenyan shilling a month salary. This is the conversation we look forward to having. We'll take a quick time out. So when we come back, Business Edge continues. Joining me on Business Edge is Antonia Musunga. She is the coordinator, Kenya Fights Inequality Alliance. The alliance is part of the Global Fights Inequality Alliance of social movements, trade unions, and non-governmental organizations. Thank you for joining me, Antonia.
Thank you for having me.
Great.
Very excited to talk to you this Kenyan afternoon.
Yes, and it's Nigerian morning, but we'll make it work. All right. So before we talk about Kenya looking for more tax revenue, we also need to look at why and how Kenya seems to be in the position it is now. Kenya's public debt is projected to reach a total percentage of the GDP by 2023, and that's 69.8% of the GDP, an increase of over 10 percentage points over pre-crisis levels. Public debt service is expected to increase as well, and that is expected to go up about 9.8 to 12.9% between 2019 and 2023. Without access to additional support in the form of concessional financing and debt relief, the country will struggle to meet creditor claims in the coming years. What has Kenya been taking out these loans for exactly?
And I'll tell you, to be honest, that's a question on every Kenyan's mind. A lot of that money is misappropriated. We have corruption scandals after corruption scandals. And the Auditor General has really queried a lot of national government and county government expenditure. Not to say when the Auditor General queries that money, it means that the money has been stolen. But money queried is susceptible to embezzlement. It means it wasn't spent in a transparent manner. The documentation is not in line with the Procurement Act. And so we keep on wondering, where does this money go? Just to highlight, in the last 3 financial years, Kenya has allocated more on debt repayment than public services, which really raises the question, does Kenya need additional money in terms of debt, or do we need to strengthen transparency and accountability at a national level as far as our national resources are concerned? The Fight Inequality Alliance really here in Kenya and with solidarity from other countries in Africa and around the world, has called for debt relief for Kenya, and further adding to that call to action to our government to say whatever savings are made from that debt relief, they must go to the very public services that regular Kenyans interact with. We are talking about education, health, water and sanitation, which remain key issues that need to be funded for sustainable communities for us.
Okay, so in total, Kenya has received about $788 million in loans from the International Monetary Fund as well as the IMF. And in addition, we heard in late November that the country was also seeking more money, and that would be a second loan from the IMF. So far, the country has refused. You did mention about debt relief. The country has refused to participate in the G20 debt service suspension initiative over concerns of its impact on access to international financial markets and official debts that represent around a third of the country's total public external debt. So in light of all of this, all of the numbers, all of the figures, break this down, because as you mentioned earlier, it seems that there are those who are asking for debt relief, but for some reason, Kenya seems to be saying no, or is not also making the demand or making the request for debt relief. And they fear that it might affect how they can continue to take loans on the international market. But yet another loan being sought by Kenya. Make it make sense.
Absolutely. And you're right, absolutely. The argument that access to capital markets is something that Kenya needs to sustain really raises the question, who benefits from this access? How many Kenyans have an idea what the capital market is, what it does when you access it? I don't know what kind of trading happens there, or how much of my 5 shillings I could trade there to put food on my table, literally and figuratively speaking. That said, the conversation that Kenyans currently have on debt really focuses on the misappropriation of those funds, one, but two, the need to continue feeding a system that continuously takes away from Kenyans through corruption and financial misappropriation, and just lack of leadership and accountability when it comes to that kind of funding and public finances. The other conversation on debt really that raises is, if, for instance, even forgetting or rather focusing on the money that we got as loan grants for COVID-19 relief. We did actually do that kind of work. But we have a system that almost always the solution to a financial crisis is adding more debt, which adds to that. And really thinking about it in a futuristic manner, that debt is going to fall on Kenyans in terms of taxes, and really not having done the relief that COVID-19 loans and grants were supposed to have done for regular Kenyans. What that means is that Kenyans have to choose to make very hard choices. In terms of taxation, when you pay tax, say income tax, you pay it before you get the money. If you buy something in a shop, you pay VAT before you get the services. So Kenyans are left in a very between a rock and a hard place, really. That money was funded in the name of public services, was not used for that manner. So there are no hospitals, there are no public hospitals to necessarily or access an affordable or free cost universal healthcare, so to speak. But also they need to pay for those services out of their pocket with the little money that has been left after taxation and after incurring additional taxes like VAT when they buy basic goods, when they go to hospital, etc., etc. So for us, really, the question we ask ourselves when we have these conversations and when we critique government and hold government to account is, when this negotiation happens, whose interest is it?
Yeah.
When Parliament approves extra borrowing, who are they representing? Because, like I said, how many Kenyans, except political elites and the elite in this country, have access to capital markets and benefits and profits from those capital markets? Who actually do they benefit? It's a very small percentage of Kenyans and not really the bigger population, like I would say.
Okay, so let's talk about the Finance Act 2020 now. It is aiming to make amendments to a raft of laws in Kenya.
I think, in my opinion, that amendment is quite premature. by and large, we are still in a pandemic, and and the reason that those taxes were reviewed in the first place is to help Kenyans navigate the pandemic in a way that the economic system was responding at that point. So it was to say we're not in a good state in terms of economic affairs. So we relieve regular Kenyans of additional economic burden by relieving them of some taxes. So we're still in a pandemic by and large. We still have a lockdown. We still have curfews at night. We still have businesses that were struggling in March last year are still on their road to recovery. So we are not at a place where reviewing those taxes would be in the best interest, especially looking at the taxes that have been reviewed. The Kenyan government also gave corporates and big businesses some tax
relief
exemptions during the COVID-19 period, but those taxes have not been reviewed as part of VAT and the income tax. And the question we are asking ourselves, why is it that the government is happy to tax VAT and essential goods services? And maybe just to mention that the Kenyan tax regime currently taxes basic goods, food, school supplies, medicine. It taxes what we commonly call as basic goods, which is food that we eat every day, wheat flour, maize meal, things like that. So it means Kenyans will have to go back deeper in their pockets, despite the fact that within the last 9 months, a lot of Kenyans have lost businesses, they've lost their incomes, and so they've not really enjoyed the economic growth to be able to go deeper in their pockets.
Okay, Antonia, let me come in here because you raised an interesting point in terms of what is being taxed and the fact that everyday Kenyans cannot in any way escape this tax. And I had this question coming later, but let me bring it up now. How is the tax spread out? Are richer, more wealthier Kenyans that we might expect to see on the upper middle class and upper and lower middle upper class, are they being taxed differently, or has the Kenyan government managed to spread this new tax burden evenly, or are we seeing richer, wealthier Kenyans take a larger share of the tax burden? Who really is going to carry this tax burden with the new amendment to the law?
As it is, the current Kenyan burden, pre-COVID, the current Kenyan burden was on the poor and the lower classes, social economic classes, to speak. And this is in reference to income tax and VAT, which is a hidden tax. So in aspects like VAT, like I have explained, the things that are taxable, in the 2018 budget, the Alliance carried out an analysis that found out that school books and school supplies and medicine was being taxed, but helicopter spare parts were tax exempted. And the question we're asking ourselves was, how many people have helicopter parts to be able to get tax exempted? But how many people will benefit from an exemption from something like school books and medicine? So that said, during the COVID-19, we saw some slight progression when the government exempted some the lower income earners on tax, and VAT was reduced to 14%. So now when this change, and really our message and rallying call has been that these tax reliefs that have been effected now need to be made permanent, so that people with lower incomes can benefit more, that they have more options in terms of, they have little money that they make, but they have more options in terms of what they can pay for, because their money is not taken all of it by the taxman. That said, going back now to the old tax regime that we had before COVID-19 means we are at where we started. So that this relief was only for 9 months, and when that has elapsed, then we're going back to the status of inequality that we were in before, which means now we're going to witness more families, and bearing in mind the cost of healthcare in this country right now, in addition to COVID-19, but also other health conditions that families are dealing with, we're going to see the increase between the gap and the rich, the gap between the poor and the rich increase, but also more income more middle-level income families falling well below the poverty line. So more poorer people struggling to meet their ends meet as a result of the new tax that we're experiencing. And really the timing is quite suspicious, so to speak. Schools in Kenya were beginning to open yesterday on the 4th and the 5th today. So it means parents who are taking back their children were preparing between the 2nd and the 4th, and today rather, to take back their children to school. And bearing that in mind, it means they've borne the cost of the new tax extension, even after they are trying to get their children to resume school after a pandemic.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And looking at the fact that you're asking for those extensions that were given, or rather the relief that was given during the COVID period to be extended so that those who are making minimal amounts of money have more options, have more things to do with their money rather than some of it being taken for tax. And there is a minimum tax. And part of the conversation with the minimum tax has also been that some are afraid of double taxation between the minimum tax and what it looks like to be an alternative tax. But before we get into that, let me ask, how many Kenyans actually do pay tax? What is the government's target in terms of expanding its Kenyan tax base?
A lot of Kenyans pay tax. Like I said, there are many taxes that we pay in Kenya, but the most prominent being the income tax and the value added tax that you pay when you go for your shopping, when you go buy food, when you buy manufactured products. That is usually falls on the consumer. It was at 14% during the tax relief period, but now it's going back to the 16%. And that also affects issues like the transport. So when you get in a matatu, for example, to go to work, the 16% of what you pay to get to work falls on you as a consumer. So all Kenyans pay tax, even a newborn baby, because the soap they use, the clothes they use, they are all the VAT included. So really to speak, the question we ask ourselves is, if all Kenyans, including the poor and the ones with who are casual rebels, would get daily jobs and daily age earners, so to speak, pay tax. But there's a very big percentage of Kenyans, or rather a big elite group that doesn't pay as much tax, multinationals, corporates, that do not pay their fair share. Where is it that this burden is being shifted back to the poorer Kenyans, so to speak?
Okay, so talking about multinationals and different companies, now the new tax law also mandates companies that have physical presence in Kenya to remit 1% of their gross turnover every month. What's been the response of businesses to this section? And do you think that this one will be passed on to the customer, to the consumer at the end of the day? And is this something that you think can bridge that revenue shortfall, that tax revenue gap that government is looking to plug?
I think, in my opinion, in looking at the trajectory of how companies have operated in this country, that is most likely going to fall to be placed on two categories of people. So small suppliers or small, say for instance, if they are manufacturing companies, so small suppliers who supply those raw materials, who are Kenyans of low income or small businesses, and also the consumers, especially if the goods are locally consumed. That said, it would be a great, taxing multinationals is a great way to meet tax targets for countries. But it also needs to make sure that the implementation of those taxes holds those multi-companies in a higher standard in ensuring that they do not transfer that cost to a consumer. So that it is to say, look, this is your turnover and this is how much you remit in an offshore account where they enjoy tax havens. And the condition is that as long as you continue remitting that to the tax havens and not the national government, that is the tapping point of that tax. And not to say, let's add more taxes to these multinationals who will easily, because of the difference in power dynamic, push it to the weakest people in that sort of chain of manufacturing and consumer process. Of course, it's the very same Kenyans who consume these products who earn very little money. They are the majority of the market, and with very little option in terms of what they can buy or cannot consume because of also how the market is structured.
Okay, so as we wrap up the conversation, let me ask you this. If the government is successful in this tax drive in increasing the tax base in Kenya, do you think that this can make up for the shortfall in Kenya's revenue? Can this go a long way towards servicing some of this debt? Can this go a long way towards making sure that Kenya doesn't necessarily have to take out as many loans at the rate at which they're taking them out? Can this be successful and lead to some influx of revenue for the economy, or for the government rather?
I think there are many ways to make sure that the targets we have are reasonable and achievable by a country of our size and nature. And one of those things would be also looking at our recurrent expenditure and the bloated executive expenditure that is currently happening, and how those expenses really affect the targets we set for ourselves as a country. During the pandemic, there were no pay cuts by lawmakers that they took. And the question we are asking ourselves is, we were trying to recover economically, why wouldn't our leadership attempt to support the country in recovering? One, by leading by example, really. I think every Kenyan, when the pandemic happened, shifted how they budget and carry out their economies at the family level. But there are no lawmakers or members of the executive that took pay cuts in any way. And so this borrowing does not happen in a vacuum. There has not been accountability in what the media termed as the COVID-19 millionaire scandal. There has been no follow-up in recovering that money. There has been no prosecutions in court. It's still a trendy headline, and that politicians currently are using to advance their political agenda. And the question really that we have to ask ourselves as Kenyans is, while we try and organize and hold our leaders to accountable, what is the degree of response that we are witnessing, even when those questions are asked, in terms of accountability of the money, leading by examples, transparency, reducing expenses where necessary, but also redirecting specific budget lines that benefit Kenyans and dignify Kenyans' livelihoods to those budget lines specifically.
Okay, I know this conversation is just beginning. For many, they're just waking up to the reality of this conversation in terms of the new tax regime in Kenya kicking off on the 1st of January 2021. There's a lot more conversation to be had also when we look at the tea, which is a very prime part of Kenya's exports. The Kenya Tea Development Agency recording about 79.02%. 79.02 billion Kenyan shilling turnover for the year which ended June 30, 2020. How will this new regime also hit them? So we still have a few more places to touch base with, but Antonia, will end this conversation here, and we look forward to having you back on Business Edge. Antonia Musunga, she is the coordinator, Kenya Fights Inequality Alliance. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we'll have you back sometime soon. Let's move straight into NC4 to watch. And we talked about Bitcoin yesterday, and we have an update. The world's flagship cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, seems to be losing steam after gaining $4,000 in just some minutes at the second trading session of 2021. The most popular crypto asset lost over $3,300 in value a few hours ago after trading as high as $33,100 yesterday. However, it is key to note it has recovered some of the losses, bouncing back above $34,000. Now, 10 of Nigeria's 29 power plants are idle on the back of low load demand by the distribution companies, DISCOs, and gas constraints to power them. Total power generation in Nigeria fell to 4,112.10 megawatts as of 6 a.m. on Monday from 4,354.7 megawatts on Sunday. And this is according to data from the Nigerian Electricity System Operator. The data also showed that generation capacity of 2,126.5 megawatts could not be utilized as of 6 a.m. on Monday as a result of DISCO's load rejection and gas constraints. Eskom closed Unit 1 after a leak was detected at one of its 3 generators. The unit had been scheduled for a maintenance shutdown and refueling, known as Outage 125, on February the 8th, according to a document sent to staff at the plants near Cape Town. And finally, Botswana has set its Pula currency to lose value at a faster rate this year, a senior official disclosed on conditions of anonymity. This as the country seeks to boost export competitiveness after the COVID-19 pandemic has had a deep impact on diamond sales, central to its economy. Botswana uses a crawling band exchange rates regime under which the Pula is pegged to a basket of currencies, including the South African rand. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website and also download our mobile app, News Central TV, on Play Store and iOS. Until next time, I'm Toluope Adeleru-Balogun.